now present For the Record.
Good morning, I'm Eric Franke. On this week's edition of For the Record, other than COVID, perhaps no topic has dominated the headlines in the past year more than police reform in America. And today we're joined by Madison Mayor Satya Rhodes Conway and new police chief Sean Barnes. Their thoughts on Madison's future when it comes to policing in the wake of the historic verdict in the Derek Chauvin murder trial. When you guys look back at that verdict last week, and Mayor, we'll start with you. What was going through your head? And I mean, obviously you were very prepared for what might result in Madison, but what's going through your head when you see that Derek Chauvin verdict?
You know, my first thought really was the jury did the right thing, but it doesn't bring George Floyd back to his family. It doesn't, you know, bring that little girl's dad back for the rest of her life. And so, you know, I'm glad the justice system worked in this case.
And Chief Barnes, I know this has got to be an interesting view from where you sit on this, being a member of law enforcement, but at the same time, probably feeling in some sense that same relief and also being a person of color.
I was relieved, but initially I was disappointed at our justice system because I saw citizens, community members who invited me to watch the verdict who were waiting in anticipation for what we all believe would be a guilty verdict. So it tells me that there are still two justice systems in this country, one in which minorities are hoping for justice and one in which people are expecting justice.
Take us through how you both were preparing for that moment.
Well, I'm still a relatively newcomer, I think, to Madison, and so obviously I reached out to the mayor's office for just some temperature check of our culture here in Madison, and communication kept coming up again and again in our conversations. And so we thought it was important to reach out to the community, let them know what our priorities were, what we were doing in preparation, and more importantly, to also let the community voice be heard regarding our preparation as well.
I really appreciate the approach that the chief has taken since he arrived here in Madison. I think that communication and outreach and trust building has been really a hallmark so far.
Mayor, when you look back at last summer, wow, what a challenge. I mean, acting Chief Wall and trying to figure out how to respond to that. I can still remember the officers lined up very peacefully, but people getting in their face, challenging them.
I think it was stressful for all of us, honestly, and you know, within the city, in the middle of a pandemic that we're just starting to wrap our heads around, you know, how even COVID was transmitted and what we needed to do to take care of ourselves and our families and our employees, and then to have, you know, really, I think, important but difficult protests at the same time. Yeah, that was a difficult time to be leading through, and I think for anybody at the city. I think that we did learn a lot, though. I think, you know, and what I saw is even over the course of the summer that we learned a lot in how we were responding to things, in how we were trying to reach out and build relationships with the people who were planning protests.
As it went on, it seemed the police was less, like the police department was less right there. And it seemed like those ended up being just walks down the street. There wasn't as much confrontation. It definitely evolved as it went on.
What did we learn from last night? What can we do differently today? How have we tried to reach out to the community today to establish more communication, to build more trust? And how do we, you know, as we see things develop, how do we approach that? And I think, you know, what you saw really, I mean, there were some very bad nights. And I think there was, you know, I don't know, I'm not the policing expert, so I don't know what I personally would have done differently, but I think we learned from them, and I think that overall, we had many, many, many days of protest in Madison, most of which were just fine.
When you think of Chief Cooper's Madison Model or Madison Method, what do you think of, and how can you take those principles and maybe evolve them, tweak them, so that they fit 2021?
I think that, you know, some of the ways that we're trying to build on. It's certainly the communication, the trust building, but also, there's a whole list of things that our community has asked us to change about the way we do public safety, and we're working through those things. In my budget, we funded the independent monitor, we funded the Civilian Oversight Board. There's a whole list of recommendations that came out of the ad hoc process, some of which have been implemented, others of which are underway. That work is important, I think, and I think it's important for us to continue to do the work and have the conversations around reimagining what public safety means. So, I come back again to looking at the data. Where do we have the deepest racial disparities? What can we do about those? We know that we need to take a different approach to behavioral and mental health calls, and so we have funded and we are close to rolling out a pilot community alternative response emergency service based on what we see in Eugene, Oregon, or Denver, Colorado, that will have trained mental health professionals along with paramedics. And so that kind of thing, I think, it's not precisely the Madison model because it's not precisely dealing with protest, but it's based in the same ethos, right? That we are listening to the community, that we respect what people are saying, and that we want to allow people to exercise their rights, live their lives in a way that is as healthy as possible, while making sure that we're keeping the entire community safe.
And still to come, a continued look at Madison's future when it comes to policing with Mayor Satya Rhodes Conway and new Police Chief Sean Barnes, including a look at their thoughts on body cameras. That's when For the Record returns.